Okay, so we are live again for our weekly London Autism Group Charity live stream that we've been doing on mental health, in particular focus on mental health and well-being and coping during the current COVID-19 crisis that we have, which is obviously, presenting a wide range of challenges for the autistic and wider autism community. So it's really great to have various experts on to talk through and share their expertise. And this week we have two phenomenal experts in the shape of Jo Grace and Becky Lyddon. So thank you so much for coming on. Becky, that is how you pronounce your name, right? I don't want to get it wrong.
It's Lyddon, but
Lyddon. As soon as I said it, as soon as I said it, I was like, "Oh God, I should have just double checked that." I'm sorry.
All right, don't worry.
Becky Lyddon.
Most people know, so.
All right. No, I want to get your I've got a particularly tricky surname, Papadopoulos, and people are always sort of falling over it, and I'm always like, Papadopoulos. Oh. So I need to make sure when it's in my control that I'm introducing other people's names, I get the pronunciation correct,
That's fine.
So yeah, thanks both of you for coming on. And obviously you two have, and by the way, hello James, how are you doing today?
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Yeah, good. Big thanks to you, James, for leading on organising this one. You're always organising everything anyway, but you in particular sorted this one out, didn't you, with Jo and Becky? So that's really helpful. Thanks, mate. You two have a particular expertise in sort of sensory world or the sensory experience, the whole sensory, game, let's call it, or whatever you want to call it. And before we sort of get into the discussion about sensory processing difficulties and different types of sensory experiences and processing, perhaps we could maybe hear a little bit about the work that you do and your backgrounds, and just maybe introduce you guys. Let's start with perhaps Jo, if you want to go first.
Yeah, so hi, I'm Jo Grace. I run a thing called the Sensory Projects, and they're all about sharing the knowledge and the creativity to use inexpensive things as effective sensory resources. I have a background in special education, and I have a background in inclusion I have family members who have physical disabilities and neurodivergent conditions. And I first worked as a support worker for somebody when I was 13. And since running the projects, I get to work with people. I think my youngest was a day old and my oldest is currently 85. So I get a good scope in there. And there's lists of things like this. I was a registered foster carer, so I've got a little sort of that version of things. And I suppose one of the relevant things for tonight is that I'm autistic myself, so I come at this from a bit of personal experience too.
Wow, that's amazing. So you've worked with a day-old, is that the right way of saying it? A day old baby, and all the way up to 85-year-olds. That's incredible.
85 and counting. She's not dead yet.
Oh, right. Yeah, of course. Yeah. Wow. Oh gosh, I'd love to get into the ins and outs of the different types of work that you do with the different age ranges, but maybe we'll come back to that. That's fascinating. Thank you so much, Jo. Becky, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. So my name's Becky. I teach about sensory processing difficulties. I'm the founder of Sensory Spectacle. I'm not from this world kind of at all. Well, I'm from this world, but I'm originally a graphic designer, and I kind of fell into this special education autism experience side of things after I graduated from uni and realised I didn't want to sit at an office desk being a graphic designer. And so I was a play worker, short breaks worker for about years. And it was in that job that I became more interested in the way we were supporting the children and young people, but also we didn't have very much training ourselves, and I wanted to understand things better so I could support the children better. And so I kind of took it upon myself to learn more. And so I did a master's in art and science, and specifically looked at the autistic sensory world. And that's when I started to work with children and adults with SPD and create immersive learning environments.
Wow, that's amazing. And how long have you been doing that now for, Becky?
So I've been doing that for 6 years.
Wow, incredible, incredible. I mean, I've heard a lot, obviously, about sensory spectacle, and you do a lot of social media stuff, right? You have a lot of useful YouTube videos, and they've got a lot of views, so they're very helpful.
A lot of my face, yes.
No, you're imparting of extraordinarily useful information, Becky. That's what it is.
One of the best
things
about Becky's work is how heavily it relies upon first-person accounts of people who have SPD. So she's learning straight from that population themselves, rather than it's just because you were saying you're outside of it, and you're really not. You're an ear to it.
Now I am, yeah. Originally, yeah. No, I think that's what kind of bases all of my work. Is actually I work with children, adults, families, parents, and they share, their experiences and insights, and that's what I try and use to help educate and create better awareness to everyone, really.
And so, have you two collaborated before, or anything like that? Have you linked up before, or?
I mean, we're practically neighbours.
Right.
I'm originally from Devon, and it just so happened when I was relatively new at starting all of this, we seemed to be at similar events, and so we saw each other a lot, and so yeah, we do know each other quite well. Jo's a good friend, and it's just nice to be able to be on something together.
We've got here a comment from J Blues. She says that she's done one of your bubbles activities. I think she's talking to you, Becky, right?
Probably. Yeah.
With my 4.5-year-old.
I've been doing activity sessions during kind of this COVID on Mondays and Thursdays on Facebook. One of them, you'll see I have a bubble machine out of a cup or a bottle.
Awesome.
I'm just seeing her second question there. SPD stands for sensory processing disorder, but we're also talking about sensory processing difficulties. And I think it's useful to understand a distinction there, because there's been research done into sensory processing disorder that shows physiological differences in the brains of people who have the disorder. But there are also a big number of people who just have sensory processing difficulties. And if you have difficulties, then you can practice skills and you can maybe help your brain to overcome those difficulties. Whereas if you have a disorder that is a physical difference in your brain, no amount of practice is going to overcome that. I mean, it's not so cut and dry because the brain is such a neuroplastic thing, but it's worth knowing that there's probably two distinct groups of people who get muddled in that one category of SPD.
Where's sorry, go ahead.
That's where it then becomes quite tricky in, say, schools, for example, where maybe an OT or another professional will support that person, child, student, and maybe not be so aware of the differences between the two, and the way that we can provide support in a kind of adapted way. People with sensory processing disorder.
I think it's a really interesting. I mean, this is one of the things I wanted to talk to you about, the whole sort of difference between disorder and difficulties, or differences even, because obviously nobody experiences sensations in any one single way. Everybody experiences things differently, right? Obviously there are some similar sort of shared similarities, but everybody experiences things differently. And I suppose I'm wondering, when does it become a matter of difference, as opposed to when does it sort of cross the threshold to disorder, let's say? I mean, I sort of, you alluded to it in terms of a physiological, I suppose, a physiological phenomenon.
Share something.
And it wouldn't be that you were looking for like a level of response. Two children could have the same response to not liking to touch wet things or not tolerating labels in their clothing, and the level of response there wouldn't indicate whether it was a disorder or a difficulty. What I would look for is how they respond to activities that you try to in order to support that. So if you were somebody who struggles with touching wet sticky things, then all of the amazing activities that Becky's been putting out on her social media through lockdown, lots of those ones that involve touching sticky things, you might find that with a bit of practice and a bit of play, and again, Becky's the play specialist, and it's a wonderful route into things like this, you get so that you are more able to tolerate that. If you've got a physical difference in your brain, you're not going to get so that you're more able to tolerate. So you would be looking at their response and being reflective of that.
And over time, it would then be thinking about, how's it impacting their quality of life, and how can you then put certain, strategies in place to help someone be able to have a shower or to have a bath if they really find the feeling of water overwhelming or whatever it might be.
Right. We've got some, thank you for that, by the way. We've got some questions coming in, which is great. Keep them coming in. So I'll start with, I suppose we'll go in chronological order. Harshita Patel. Hello, Harshita. Does SPD change and heighten in puberty? Any thoughts on that?
So I think if we think about hormones in general and how hormones affect our bodies and changes, I think you're likely to notice changes in the way that someone's responding to their sensory environment. However, like Jo's just kind of mentioned, if we're talking about a sensory processing disorder, that impact is there, and so it may well not be more heightened during puberty, but you may notice different responses during puberty because of maybe other things that their body is going through and changes, and the way that maybe they're trying to understand what's happening as well.
So different interactions almost with the hormonal changes as opposed to increases.
I wouldn't say that there's going to be definite changes during puberty. However, because of everything else that's changing in our bodies, there's probably going to be more of a need for that person to feel in control. And so therefore they may well be displaying that, no, I need to keep this fidget with me because actually that's the one thing that I can manage and control and feel kind of okay with.
I suppose also there's all the sort of additional or different social pressures that come along with being a teenager, right? And change, coming into that age that might perhaps, increase anxiety or stress or whatever it is, and then that perhaps presumably also interplays with, challenges to do with sensory processing and how that's leveraged to cope. I don't know. I'm sort of guessing here.
Yeah,
do you agree with that?
If you think about all of us, when we feel a bit anxious or nervous about something, you'll notice, I think you were saying right at the beginning, we're all sensory. And so if I'm feeling a bit nervous, I might start fiddling with my nails or, biting my nails or fidgeting with something. And so if you think, if I, in my daily routine, find it really difficult to regulate the sound that's going on around me, if that's going to be changing for whatever reason, I'm going to want to feel more in control of that. So it may well be that I cover my ears for longer, or that I start to speak a bit louder or listen to my favorite music a lot more of the time.
Right. Thank you for that. Jo, did you want to add something? Sorry.
Only just commenting on the other sort of changes that go on in the teenage brain. So some of those would stop you accessing your previous support strategies, the way that our language alters during our teenage years, the grunting that is sort of, famous for the Kevin the teenager is a product of those alterations in the brain. And also your teenage years are a period in your life when you most viscerally experience the world. So especially as you hit puberty. So depending on whether you do that, some young people will hit that in before their teenage years, and some young people will be within their teenage years. But those moments, I'm just thinking of, I get to work sometimes with people with later stage dementia, because once they lose their capacity with language, their world becomes a sensory one, and the sensory conversations and strategies that I might use with somebody with a profound disability become relevant. And when I'm looking for sensory points of connection with them, often some of the best ones are the sensory experiences from their teenage years, because they registered so profoundly on the brain at that time. So if you are having that more visceral experience of the world, then it's likely that that would play into your sensory processing differences or difficulties.
That's fascinating. Thank you, Jo. Harshit has just added, thank you for the comment, Harshit. And if you've got any follow-up questions, please feel free. He now wears headphones and is extra sensitive with showers. I suppose she's sort of perhaps indicating that he's entering puberty, or is in early stages of puberty, perhaps, and now this change has happened. So I suppose that reflects, what you've been talking about.
Yeah, and I think just throughout our lives, you're going to notice changes anyway. I talk to a lot of teachers and they say, oh, well, they've stopped doing that now, but now they're doing this. And actually, if you break it down, if you look at what I refer to as something called a sensory characteristic, so the thing that they're doing, so chewing on something, for example, it's actually working out, well, what's the sensory purpose behind them doing that? Because this new thing that they're doing may well be for the same sensory purpose. And so wearing headphones, like I was saying, that might be his comfort. That might be his thing of, I feel secure now because I've got something that's here that's helping me. Becoming more sensitive with showers could be lots of different sensory aspects, and it could also be anything that may have changed within that environment as well as weather changes and things that we can't necessarily control.
Yeah, thank you. Clark Candy's just asked what the link on Facebook. I think he's talking about the your 2 pages, I suppose. What would those links be? Is it just a matter of going to Facebook, isn't it, and searching for?
So I'm just Sensory Spectacle, so they can find Sensory Spectacle. And
yeah, I'm a person on Facebook. I do have a page, but I can't drive it. But my website has my connection details, and that's just thesensoryprojects.co.uk.
Okay, great, thank you. So we've got an interesting question here from Nadia Jallard, who, it's an interesting question. I suppose it isn't going to be always obvious, isn't it? What sensory issues or challenges or difficulties your child has exactly. Some of it's going to be some of it might be more obvious than others, but the others are still there, right? So what kind of investigatory work do you do? How does one know as a parent, perhaps, or not as necessarily as a parent, but anyone? How would you work it out?
I think I've done a bad thing, because I'm watching the questions as they come up live, and Nadia asked us that when we were discussing sensory processing difficulties and sensory processing disorder. So that thing that we were saying earlier, being reflective on how they respond to those activities, is probably what she means, but I don't know.
You could be right.
If you're looking at what sort of sensory difficulties you have, then you would be looking, like Becky was just saying, at what the behaviour is and what the senses might be getting from that.
Right. Okay, and then Nadia's got a follow-up comment here. My son is not intolerant of things, but seeks sensory things such as hitting things to get the sensory feedback. Anything that makes a noise, he's 4.
So this is a really good example of kind of what I was just saying. So hitting things, we can break that down into a lot of kind of different aspects. Yes, it might be noise. It might be the physical feeling, so that body feedback that you're getting when you're hitting something. It could be the tactile experience. It could be the visual, so it might be the fact that they're watching their hand as it's moving, as it's hitting into something, and maybe then the response, the cause and effect from that. So As a parent, if it is the noise, she's aware that, it's because he's getting that response for the sound, then it may well be that she's started to notice he's hitting lots of different things for a specific noise, rather than maybe hitting the same part of a wall because of that particular body feedback that he's getting. Anything that so he's looking, she said he's seeking, he's looking for sensory input. However, actually, if it's that proprioceptive input, if it's that body awareness input, then actually what he's doing is something to try and help him feel where his body is, just maybe while he's sitting eating his dinner, while he's doing an activity, he might be noticing that he's hitting something at the same time. And that can be a way that he's supporting himself to be regulated. But he is very young as well, and children like to hit things.
It's a nice point you just made, because we were saying about working out what sensory input something is providing, so that's making a sound or it's providing a pressure against the body. But you just mentioned when he's doing it, and so I was thinking, when I was younger, so I have some sensory differences, I used to do things that would have looked strange. So one of the things that I did was I would repeatedly squint into the sunshine, and the effect that had for me was I could see the little shards of light through my eyelashes, and it went all rainbowy. But I only did that at playtimes. When I was in a situation where lots of other children were moving around and playing in an unstructured way that I didn't understand, if I'd been outside doing an activity with my class where I understood, what I was doing now and what I was doing next, I wouldn't have been doing that, because I would have understood how to be in that current situation.
Yeah, I did much the same thing actually, Jo. Whenever I got bored, and I used to, I don't know, be sent to my room for a lay down. The sun would come in my window, and I would do exactly the same thing, and it would just pass the time. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks for that. So we've got a question here from Sakina. Can you please advise on the common sensory difficulties when toilet training children? Any thoughts?
Jo, did you want to say something?
Always, but you can talk too.
I was just going to say, I've actually just put out quite a lot of work about toilet training. I've just done a new online training specifically for this, because it's a whole, it's pretty much all of our senses. And so really you need to look at other sensory aspects if they think it's sensory related. So, for example, it could be their vestibular sense. It could be the fact that they find it difficult to actually balance on a toilet when they're put on it. Maybe going from a potty to a toilet can be a big change, because actually when you're on a potty, your feet are firmly on the ground, whereas when you're on a toilet, you're not necessarily balanced as well. It could be, the smell of the environment, the feel of the toilet seat. It could be the ability to wipe themselves, clean themselves, or the fact that they like how they feel when they're wet or when they've soiled themselves. However, ultimately, it could also be the fact that they're finding it difficult to recognise that internal message, so our interoceptive messages telling us, when we actually need to go to the toilet. And I think Jo is probably going to talk a little bit about that more, because that's what she was going to.
Yeah, you're right. When I saw that one pop up, that's what I thought. I think interoception is the most interesting sense here, and we're mostly taught at school that we have 5 senses. Becky and I both run to a good deal more than that on the sensory spectacle and the sensory projects. I get into Twitter chats with people who are going, "Do you know there's 11 senses? Do you know there's technically there's 33?" So so I just get to 8 or 9 is a good number at the moment, but our interoceptive sense is one of the most interesting senses that we've been learning about through research recently. The research into interoception is all very new. It's all stuff with a 2000 date on it, but it is unique amongst the senses in that it's our only sense that is about sensing our internal world. All of our other senses are about sensing our external world. And your interoception tells you how you feel. And it's a very strange one to have an impairment with, because you would think that people know how they feel because they feel it. And so if you can't feel that you need to go to the toilet, then that's obviously going to affect your ability to respond to toilet training. And there are Becky's work, and it's worth saying about Kelly Mailer's work as well, isn't it? That information is out there to support you if that's what you're facing with your child. But it's I think if you do think something's going on there, it's worth thinking about the other effects that an impairment to your interoception can have. And so, like, if you were partially sighted, or if you were you had problems hearing, that would be very obvious to the world around you. You would get noticed for having those impairments. But if you have an impairment to your interoception, you won't necessarily know about it yourself, because it's not that you don't have feelings. We need two words. You have the feelings, you just don't have the thing that feels your feelings, or you're feeling your feelings a bit. And I have impaired interoception, so I will only notice an emotion once it's got really big. Most of the time, if you ask me how I feel, I don't really know. And to be quite honest with you, I don't really care, because it's not relevant to my life. I'm busy doing other things and not playing on an emotional roller coaster. But it is a risk factor to me, because if you were somebody with, like the visual equivalent, the 20/20 interoception, then you would spot when you were getting a bit stressed. You might recognize what environment it was, that it was that particular person that was making you a bit stressed, because you began to feel a bit stressed when you were around them, or it was a particular task at work. And then you would do something to mitigate that whilst the emotion was small, whereas I'll only notice once it's catastrophic and I've got no clue what caused it.
And I think just adding in that our interoceptive sense doesn't just help us to recognize that feeling. So I'm feeling hungry, for example. It's also helping us to understand emotional states as well. So, like what Jo was saying, if someone said to her, "Oh, you seem really angry," she doesn't recognize that, for example, maybe until it's that real kind of heightened state, and then it's like, I'm angry. Why didn't I recognize this earlier, or why didn't I feel that sensation?
Yeah. When I first lived with my husband, he would come in from work and say, "How are you doing? How are you feeling?" And I'd like, why are you asking me such a hard question? That's not the chat. And we've switched it around now. He comes in from work and he tells me how I'm feeling, because he can see it. And that's really useful, because he'll say, "Oh, you're a bit tired, you're a bit stressed." You're like, "Am I? Oh, should do something about that." It's very handy to know. And you never think to tell somebody how they're feeling, but actually, if you are somebody's parent, you're very likely to be right. Your instincts about your children are pretty much all the time right. And so it can be useful to tell people, and to tell people how if he's reading that, presumably my shoulders are high, my face looks in a different way. And if he could teach, if I was willing to learn, and I'm not, I'm too old to teach new tricks, but if you have a young child, you might still stand a chance. If he could teach me the signals that he sees on me, I can see that your face is looking angry, I can see that your shoulders are up here, and I could visually recognize them. I could look in a mirror and go, "Oh, that's how I'm feeling." Then I could make those adjustments that would mean I wouldn't have to wait until I get to some big peak.
So going back to the toilet, sorry, James.
Sorry, I wanted to jump in about this, because toileting is a really common question we get on the Facebook group as well. And my experience with my son was exactly very similar to what Jo was describing. And he obviously has this interoception, a sort of very there's a big delay in him actually feeling it, wanting to go to the toilet. And it would get to a stage where he'd just stand up and he'd panic, and he'd already gone, you know. And it took a long time, but to get him toilet trained. It took until he was 8, and how I've done that is I've basically recognised his body language, so I know to keep an eye on him all the time. And if I see him stand up and suddenly start flapping his arms on the spot, I know that he's just suddenly realised that he needs to go badly, you know. And then I started leading him to the toilet and showing him. And once he got used to that, now he'll come and try to tell me by flapping his arms at me. He'll come and find me. But it's taken about 3 years of that process. He's now, well, actually 4 years, because he's now 12. But now it works, you know, and it was useful to know about that when the information was coming out about interoception. Yeah.
Yeah, so some of the difficulties with interoception and, you know, toileting are maybe someone finds it difficult to even just recognize a sensation. And so, like Jo and Jake said, they'll recognize it when it's then really intense. And so when you're toilet training, if you then all of a sudden recognize you need to go to the toilet, you need to go to the toilet then. And so for that person, if they're in school and they can't go to the toilet when they request to because they're in a lesson, or, you know, it's not possible for someone to take them to the toilet at that moment in time, then that's going to impact them and, you know, their ability to associate that feeling of needing to go to the toilet with actually going to the toilet. And then there's the other side where some people will recognize, even with maybe the tiniest of sensations, they might feel like they almost constantly need to go to the toilet, because when they have a drink, they might then feel like they need to go. And so that feeling of constantly wanting to go to the toilet can also be really difficult to then understand for someone if they're constantly feeling something down here and it's not hunger and it's not you know, a little bit of nerves and their belly grumbling or whatever might be a similar feeling for them, but it's actually the fact that they need to go to the toilet again. So for each person, it's very, very different. And like Jo said, the parents know best. And I think Jane's just given a really good example. You'll be able to see with your child what they're doing when it seems like they might need to go. And it's following their lead, and it's talking about emotions. It's talking about, oh, you look like you need to go to the toilet, or you look a little bit anxious, or you look a little bit stressed, and helping them to recognize the way that they might be feeling or presenting themselves is one of the best ways that we can then start to support that internal awareness.
And not comparing to a typical age. It doesn't matter when they're learning, just that they're on that route.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So, this is fascinating. I hold my hands up and confess I've not heard of that particular sense before.
It's a good one. It's a new one.
Yeah, but it makes a lot of sense. So obviously, so it's really key then, are you saying, for parents and people around, you know, if it's a sibling or whatever family member it is, to sort of communicate what they're observing in terms of how someone seems, in terms of their emotional health and so forth, right? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
That really helps. Sorry.
No, go for it, Jo.
So we could probably say it at the same time. One of the analogies that gets used a lot is of a fuel gauge in a car. So if you have a working interoceptive system, you can constantly monitor where your emotions are at. If you have a working fuel gauge in a car, you constantly can monitor how much fuel is in the car. If you've got a working fuel gauge, you're very unlikely to run out of petrol. If you haven't got a working fuel gauge, you need to come up with a workaround. So that's maybe counting how many miles you've gone or using a dipstick. And if you habituate yourself to do that, then you are less likely to run out of petrol. But quite likely you will still run out of petrol. So for somebody like me, and I am such a bad/good example, because I can tell you this stuff and I don't do it. You know, the person who's got the broken fuel gauge should be every morning when they go out and drive their car, they should be putting the dipstick in to check their emotions. I should, every time I go to the toilet, look in the mirror and do a kind of visual check, and I do not. But if you can cue us into those markers and say, this is what I'm seeing that your muscles are tense, that your face is like this, then you can give us that information, and it's definitely a useful thing.
It's probably particularly useful to support yourself, or to get support with this in the current climate that we're in, right? In the COVID-19 climate, given how increased our stress levels are.
Can I jump in?
Yeah, go ahead.
One of the other things that's very useful for knowing is how hungry you are and that kind of thing. Because I know my son can't tell if he's hungry or not, because he eats and eats and eats, and then he'll get constipated and he'll still eat. So I have to control his diet for the sake of his weight and his health, everything like that. But I can see the usefulness of knowing that in the current lockdown, because it's all to do with self-care, isn't it? And when to know when to self-care and that kind of thing, and having that awareness.
Yeah, all of those kind of daily living things that we rely on, we need our interoceptive sense for. So eating, sleeping, toileting, the things that we do and don't necessarily always second think about. But the well-being side of that is, in this current climate, lots of things have changed, lots of routines have changed. And so, you know, to begin with, it might have felt like for a lot of children and young people that, oh, I'm on holiday. But then when there's an aspect of maybe needing to learn while I'm at home, that's a different routine to be in. And so how do I then recognize how my body is feeling when I'm also trying to understand being in a new routine, and, you know, almost trying to question, well, why is mum at home if usually I'm at school and I don't normally see mum in the holidays because mum's working and dad's at home, or whatever it is. All of these changes aren't necessarily explained. And so then it can be really confusing for someone trying to understand that, let alone then also trying to support their sensory well-being at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. And just in a general additional point, it kind of makes me think, you know, reinforces the point, the importance of just open communication, and how effective that can be, you know, in terms of family support, and the importance of just talking openly about mental health as well, you know, destigmatizing it. That's going to have a big impact, I presume, in this kind of area. But it also makes me think how difficult isolated people must be as well, you know, who don't perhaps have that, you know, that support that's going to be so useful in handling general stresses, and how that plays into interoception issues, but particularly during the COVID-19 crisis, as you were saying, Becky, with the sort of additional risk factors that play, you know, brings into it. So really interesting stuff. We have a question here from Sakina. Again, she's just adding, so I'll read it out. I feel my son chooses not to urinate when he is in the toilet. As soon as he is out of the toilet, he wets himself. Today I noted that he no longer can hold it when he pees for a few seconds in the toilet, and then again he holds his bladder. When this happens, I'm not sure whether to reward him or not, as it's an overflow.
So I'd be interested to know if he's happy to pee elsewhere. When I was watching that question come up, so Becky was saying about that it could be the environment of the bathroom, and if you're somebody who's sensitive to smell, then that can be a particularly challenging sense to be sensitive to, because it's the only sense processed by your limbic brain, all of your other senses are processed by your thalamus, which is your thinking brain, and your sense of smell is processed by your limbic brain, which is your emotional brain. So if you struggle with smells, it's a particularly emotional struggle, and bathrooms do smell very different to other rooms in the house. So if he's happy to sort of wee in the corner, or wee on the carpet, or wee in the garden, then that would make me think along those lines. But she also says that he holds it and just lets a little bit out. And so I was also wondering about interception. Maybe he can feel that he needs to go to the toilet when his bladder is really, really full. And when it's not really full, he considers that that's a job done, and he doesn't know that he has to keep on weeing. And if it was something like that, you might be able to build in a social story to say you have to keep weeing until your wee stops, or you might be able to do it. I was slightly tempted by doing a play option, you know, especially if it's a little boy, because you can put things down the toilet to wee on, can't you? But then there's a risk that depending on how your understanding is going to develop, you don't want to use a strategy now that then becomes a strategy you can't use when they're older. So you would make a judgment on that one.
Yeah.
Can I also add, when I was little, I was very sensory as well. I remember having a fear of the noise. There was a fan, sort of air conditioning fan, and that sort of threw me off for a number of years. I was scared to go in the bathroom, but I could use the toilet downstairs. But also the noise of the flushes as well. If it was a particularly loud flush, then I would, even into my teens, I would flush and then run out of there without knowing what I was doing. And then only when I got a lot older did I realize what I was doing and say, what am I doing? You know, but it was just sort of built into me to do that from the habit of that.
Yeah, it's a bit, it's sharing too much information, but I learned to pee entirely silently, which is a skill.
This is where we were kind of saying, you know, the life stuff that we have to do involves apparently more of our senses. It's more obvious how many more of our senses it could be related to. So could be the temperature of the toilet. It could be the fact that maybe, you know, when he stands to go to the toilet, in some toilets it's okay, but other toilets it's you know, maybe he needs to be a bit higher, whatever. You know, there's so many different elements to it, and we've had noise, we've had the sound, it could be the visual. There's pretty much every sensory aspect that it could be. So if she's not sure, then it's about looking at what are the other things that he does throughout his kind of daily routine, which might also give her a clue as to why maybe he finds it difficult to go into the toilet.
Yeah.
And then going back to thinking about, well, also it could be the fact that everything he requires internally needs to be at a really high impact. So it needs a lot of sensation before he even recognises it. And it's only then when he recognises it that he knows, I need to go to the toilet. And when he goes to the toilet, he might not then feel comfortable when he fully goes to the toilet, because then it might feel like there's absolutely nothing to feel. So that's just wrong. That's strange, because he feels best when actually he can feel more of that pressure or sensation.
If there is sort of a negative feeling built up over however long it takes, if it takes a long time for toilet training, the way I broke my son out of that was actually to take him out of the home and try in different toilets outside. He actually did his first wee in a toilet in a brand new supermarket, which had a lovely, you know, a proper children's toilet, a sort of large area around it. And once he did it there, then he came home and did it. And that was also good for me as well, for my sort of stopping my anxiety and that kind of thing, and making me more determined to make him, you know, show him how to go at home. So yeah,
it can be so tough on parents, can't it? I mean, on everybody, of course, but just sort of the sort of anxiety of the unknown, you know, struggling to figure out the solutions all the way forward. But then when you figure things out, you're creative and you get progress. It can be presumably very rewarding, right, as you were saying, James. But
Yeah,
kudos to you for being creative and figuring it out, making progress. But it must be tough often to work through the anxieties associated with the unknowns and the challenges, which is why it's great to seek support, get advice from people like you guys, if and when necessary. So we've got another question from Clark Candy, who's asking, can sensory processing difficulties be related to food? And my son will only eat certain foods. So food's a whole nother topic, isn't it?
Well, it ties in again with interoception, but also it ties in with all of the senses. It could be the sound of the food when they crunch it. It could be the visual look. It could be the texture of it. It could be the smell of it. It could be the taste of it. It really can be any sensory system. And I am on all my workshops, I get asked this question pretty much every time, and I'm given a list of foods that people eat. But I actually encourage them to, again, look at the other things in their lifestyle that they might need to regulate. So, for example, if someone seeks out sound throughout their daily life, so they might repeat things, they might hum, they might sing, maybe they're eating dry, crunchy foods because actually that auditory input is supportive for them and they're getting that while they're eating. Or it might be the texture of it, and they chew or they feel things, or they like to get mucky and messy, and that's due to a similar kind of tactile input. So you can usually look at food choices as well if you look at their other kind of daily routines and ways that they're supporting themselves, regulating themselves.
Eating is a massive one because it's such an easy one for tension to build up around. Toileting is another big one because parents obviously are very concerned that their child learns to use the toilet for all the obvious reasons. But with toileting, you have got a workaround. If your child hasn't learned to use the toilet, you can put them in nappies. With eating, you have no choice. If your child doesn't eat, they die. So it's very important to parents and to anybody who cares about those children that they eat. And if you're somebody who struggles with your sensory world, if you're somebody who struggles with touching sticky things, if I were to ask you to touch something sticky, you would position your I can't, I'm not even in screen. You would touch it as far away from your body as you possibly could. You would keep all of yourself away from it, and you would extend that finger and you'd just touch it, just a little bit. And when I ask you to eat, I'm not only asking you to touch that sticky, wet stuff with a finger, I'm asking you to touch it with something that has way more nerve endings. And I'm not asking you to touch it at a distance from yourself. I'm not even asking you to touch it really close to yourself. I'm literally asking you to touch it in your face. It's so invasive. And at the same time, I'm also asking you to deal with sound. And when we eat, we don't hear the noise of our own mastication because we've learned to tune it out. It's not because we don't hear it. Your mouth is right by your ear. Of course you hear it, but our brain filters it out. And if I were to had a proper microphone and I crunched something down the microphone to you, you would hear all of their horrible noises. So if you're somebody who struggles with sound, again, not only am I asking you to listen to those noises, not just close up in your face. If you struggle with taste, in your face. And if you struggle with smell, which is so emotional, again, in your face. And I'm asking you to do all of those things all at the same time, all in your face. It's terrifying. And it gets even more terrifying for those people because ordinarily, when you struggle to touch the wet thing, or when you struggle with the loud noise in the environment, there will be one person who protects you from it. So ordinarily, you're at the party and it gets too loud for you, and your mum or your dad or whoever it is will take you out of that environment, will offer you the headphones, will be your comfort, your rescuer. And in this situation, they're the person that does it to you. And so it's terrifying because you're on your own in that situation. You have all that sensory stuff going on and you have no way to cope. And so it's very natural that people develop a panic reaction around food and around anything that looks like food, you know, the table, the knives and forks, all of this. And so again, Becky's sort of play approach to things, which is there in all of her wonderful videos online, is the way to do it. If I was to try and support a child who is struggling with their eating in a sensory way, I wouldn't do it anywhere near a mealtime. I wouldn't begin with using food, nothing that gives them a clue that that's what I was onto. And I would work on developing those different things. So can we touch sticky stuff? And actually touching it with your hands first is a stepping stone to being able to cope with it in your mouth. Can I listen to those noises? I mean, it sounds daft, but, you know, YouTube has sound effects for everything, doesn't it? Can I play you the noise of somebody crunching an apple or slurping a drink whilst you're playing your favorite computer game, so you're in a position where you're relaxed? Can we practice all those little bits one at a time before we ask you to do it all at once? And let's do it, you know, somewhere that is totally not related to that very pressurized environment of eating. But of course, as you do that, they do still need to eat. And so whatever the food is that they are willing to eat, you know, if you can find ways, and I fully appreciate that this is not easy to do. I used to support a young man who only ate chips, only chips. He was 14. He had got to 14. It's amazing how much of a human body you can build just on chips. And his mother would desperately try and lace his chips with, she would crush up a vitamin tablet and she'd slice the chip open and put it inside, and she'd show you the chips and go, can you tell which one? And we'd all look at it and go, no, I can't tell which one it is. And he would eat the whole pile and leave that one chip. You know, if you can find the way around it. Yeah. Some of the new nutritional drinks like Huel, where it's everything in a drink, it's a very, I'm sort of doing bad advertising for Huel, aren't I? It's a very bland thing, so it might be that that's an accessible option. Yeah, and then you build it up from there. And I am somebody who only ate beige as a child, and my first step into eating vegetables came through eating crisps. So I was willing to eat crisps, and this is another sort of autism take on it. The reason that I was willing to eat crisps is because the crisps are the same every time you open the packet. My mum's spaghetti bolognese is fairly similar every time she makes it, but it's not the same. Crisps are the same every time you open the packet. So I know what I'm going to get. I feel confident in these things. And I used to consider, up until far too old, at 19, I considered 2 different flavors. As long as it's different flavors, it counts as a meal. So if you've got a packet of like roast beef flavored crisps and pickled onions, that's meat and vegetables and your carbs, isn't it? That's fine. I got so that I was having that as a meal, and then I thought, well, I like pickled onion crisps. I wonder if I would like pickled onions. And pickled onion crisps was my gateway into, it's like drug taking. Wow. It's like my slippery slope into pickled onions. And that's another little quirk, in that quite often when people are worried about food, we try them on very bland stuff. And for me, it was always easier to do pickled onions, heavily salted things that pack a real punch, are more accessible. So it's not always the sort of start point that you think.
Wow.
Just one thing I just want to touch on before we move off the food thing is also, it's one thing that we are fully in control of. So I am fully in control of what I'm therefore putting in my mouth and eating. And there's a lot of anxiety from, you know, professionals and parents at lunchtimes, especially, you know, in school, and they're told, oh, they didn't eat anything when they're at school today. And it can be, you know, their day has been so mixed with them being able to support themselves, regulate themselves through, you know, the changes of the classroom or the environment or the activity or the fact they woke up late or whatever it might be. By the time it gets to lunchtime, actually, I just need a bit of me time, essentially. I just need a bit of time where I can feel in control. And it might be, no, I'm not going to eat anything. I don't want to even eat the food that I've brought along with me. Or it might be, yes, I'm always going to eat my Walker's crisps. Or I have someone I used to support that would only eat Ginster sausage rolls. And, you know, they very quickly stopped selling them in lots of supermarkets. And so it's about helping parents to also know, actually, it is one thing that your child is fully in control of, and you could see that as a positive, as well as the negative that they might be currently seeing of, well, they're eating such a limited diet. Actually, they could be using that food time to also be regulating, to also be helping them to essentially calm themselves down.
And that binary reporting of it, did they eat yes or no, is makes it very all or nothing. If you can see it as those little stepping stones, and we're very used to seeing gradual improvement in other areas. So if you have smelt 2 different food smells, if you've touched 2 different food textures, if you've heard 3 different, sounds of eating, you are on a little journey, little steps towards being able to cope with all of those things at once. And if you're not going to ever be able to cope with the noise and with the stuff, then you're looking at substitute things. So if I can't cope with hearing this noise, maybe I need to listen to really loud music whilst I'm eating my dinner. If I can't cope with the smell of my food, maybe I can hold my nose as I eat my food. One of the very common ones that we see is people only eating beige. And I always think that's just a very easy way of taking out some of the sensory input from your dinner, isn't it? If you want a lower stimulating meal, I'll just go with one colour. That solved the problem of looking at my food. Now let's get on with dealing with the other issues.
Okay, yeah, thank you so much. Well, that's really fascinating. And it's just amazing how much goes on in every little thing, it's incredible. Just very quickly, if you don't mind commenting on Harshita Patel's second question, and then I know we're running out of time because we have to stop at 9, and I just want to spare a few minutes for just your general tips and advice for people, to cope better, I suppose, in terms of, managing the sensory experience and processing difficulties in the current context. But for just very quickly, because I feel bad if we didn't answer the question. Harshita Patel's just asked, why do they watch programs or music on repeat? Is this to regulate?
The quick answer could be yes, it could be to regulate. It could also be for lots of other reasons. It could be familiarity in that specific part of a song or a program. It could be languages developing, and so learning words and rhythm and sound repeating themselves. If we're thinking about sensory processing difficulties, yes, they're in control of it again, so they might be going over the same bit over and over again because of the way that picture looks or the way that bit sounds, and so it I hate to be that person, but it could be for lots of different reasons, and so it is very difficult for me to give any kind of opinion unless I've actually met that person and maybe worked with them and really get to know them.
That's fair enough.
Offer as much insight as I can.
Okay, thank you for that. I appreciate that. Yeah, that's a tricky one. So just because we've only got a couple more minutes left, if you wouldn't mind just giving some general ideas or tips of advice given the situation that we're in, perhaps if we want to start with Becky.
Yeah, sure. I think so. Recently, as in the last couple of weeks, I've been having lots of messages from families just saying that I've noticed such a change in my child in the last 2 weeks compared to how they were managing before. And I think we are getting to a time now where it has been a lot longer, and so it might be harder to stay in routines. But my kind of go-to is to really try and get some type of physical input every day. If you can get out of the house and go for a walk or go for a stomp, that's great. If you can't, if you've got a garden, stomp around your garden, dig in your garden, do something where you can use your joints and your muscles and getting that physical input. If you're in your home, then, things like stretching, if you're able to do so, it doesn't have to be yoga, it doesn't have to be, an official plan or anything, but something where you can take in some deep breaths, you can stretch your body, is just really, really going to help kind of all of our senses to essentially work together and you feel a bit more grounded. I think Jo's probably going to elaborate a bit more on that with maybe a bit of a mental health side of things. I'm going to guess. Maybe not.
I was thinking about making little sensory zones in your house. So some people have talked about their children seeking out particular stimulation, and other people, I was wondering about the programs on repeat type of thing. Sometimes that's a way of relaxing and winding down, and if you have a sort of continued stimulus that you know what it is, it takes less processing effort from you. So if you can sort of tune your senses to that stimulus, it's a rest, not a rest. It's like I'll do this, and that's easy for me to do, and that's easier than dealing with all of this. But actually making like little dens under a table, throw a heavy blanket over a table and have a little zone where it's less stimulating, where there's less noise. If there's a room in the house, or if under the stairs can be appropriated for a little sensory getaway zone, then that would be a nice thing to do. There's positives are coming out of this. I know a lot of families with children on the spectrum have been saying, my child's a lot less stressed since they had to go to school all the time, since they had the sort of one-to-one support of somebody who intuitively understands them. They're seeing progress is being made. So there are positives coming out of the horrible time as well.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, a lot of the research is saying that as well, that actually there's a wide range of different stories, but it seems to be generally it's either, you know, new challenges, or actually there are some positive situations. I mean, with
for parents generally, because they also don't know maybe when they're going back to work and when they can go back to work, and so that's going to impact your whole kind of home dynamic as well. And so if you can provide some area for your child to be able to feel calm and feel relaxed, that's ultimately what you want to be able to be doing.
So finding strategies ultimately to prioritize their well-being and mental health.
Not just theirs, yours too, because you're the hub that keeps them going.
Definitely, yeah, really good advice. Thank you. Wow. Okay, that hour just flew by. James, I wonder if is there anything else you wanted to ask or say?
Just to add to that, we've got one of these Lycra sheets, and my son is very much a sensory seeker. So to calm down, he needs to self-regulate. So he'll go under this sheet, and it's like what you're saying about being under a table. He can just see the light shining through this blue, but he's very much in his own sort of environment, and he can push his body against it and get that feedback from it, the sensory feedback. So it's very calming for him. So yeah, and we can't get out very much at the moment. So yeah, so that's the way we sort of cope with things.
All right, thank you. That's helpful, really helpful. Good to know. Okay, so it's been a real pleasure. Is there any final things that you want to add, guys, or are you happy to sign off?
Thanks for having us on.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome. It's been fun. I've learned a lot. Interoception, I didn't know about that. I'm going to go and look that one up. And yeah, I've really enjoyed it. Thank you so much. And I hope that the listeners find this really helpful. I'm sure people will. This recording we'll put on our YouTube channel as well, and I'll distribute the links to you guys so you can share them perhaps. And yeah, it's been fun. Thank you. Thanks very much, and take care and stay safe. And hope to speak to you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.